4th of September recognizes and celebrates the cultural wealth of our nation. South Africans celebrate the day by remembering the cultural heritage of the many cultures that make up the population of South Africa. We now welcome founder of I'm South African, Yavi Madurai. Yavi, thank you so much for your time this morning here on the agenda. Now, I know in less than an hour's time, you will be hosting a dialogue, by key South Africans on the topic of Heritage Day. Talk to me about this dialogue and the importance thereof.
So thank you so much, Janati. So yes, I'm very excited and a little bit nervous in terms of hosting such esteemed guests. But today is about looking at heritage in a different way. So we are sitting with such a dismal state when it comes to our economic outlook, when it comes to, poverty alleviation and our state of inequality. So one of the things, or the main focus today around heritage is normalizing. What we're saying is normalize economic freedom as part of the culture and heritage of South Africa in terms of the future generations that are going to inherit what we are leaving behind. The context of it is basically, when you look, there's a document by the Heritage Foundation, and they've been publishing it for the past 21 years, and it's called the Economic Freedom Index. And very sadly, it has stated that in 2021, South Africa, and this part really upset me, to say the least, is that South Africa is considered mostly unfree when it comes to economic freedom. And that means so much on various levels. And this is why we are talking about it today in terms of how do we now start to create a culture of economic freedom within the context of heritage.
Now, that's also very troubling. I mean, South Africa being considered unfree when it comes to economic freedom. And if we just have to look at the context of today, COVID-19 has shown us just how unequal of a society we are. Now, in terms of the youth and where we sit in terms of unemployment in this country, how possible is it to have that index come to pass in terms of achieving economic freedom, particularly for the youth of this country, and especially if you have to look at things like the SMEs of South Africa?
No, this is exactly it. That's exactly, where we need to be, or why we need to be looking at it. So, we focus a lot, and we're a very rich country when it comes to all of our diverse cultures, and traditions and that kind of thing. And we are so, it doesn't matter who you are, what part of the color spectrum, race spectrum, or which part of South Africa you come from in terms of tribal. We are so committed to, our culture and our traditions and all of those kind of things. But yet we don't necessarily place that same kind of commitment, that focus into ensuring things like wealth creation, family wealth building, and creating that economic freedom that we so desperately need, especially post-COVID, and especially in this post or build SA back better. As we hit it. In terms of the youth, obviously the youth are the most impacted. When we looked at the stats that came out of SASSA from GovChat, there were 11 million new registrations in terms of the 350 rand grant, et cetera. And of that, 70% and more, and they're still counting, so it's not a final number, were young people and women. So these are the most impacted. We need to start thinking very, very clearly about how do we now start to create a culture of understanding, of building back that kind of economic freedom, because we did have it at some point in time. Maybe it wasn't exactly where we wanted it to be, but we have lost a lot over the last few years. Not only COVID just exacerbated an already fragile, an already fragile country and a very fragile nation, so to speak.
Now, Yavi, I know that you are going to go soon and, to start this panel discussion. Talk to me about the guests on this discussion. I know that this conversation is really being spearheaded by the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Pinky Kekana, and also you've got other guests, including Business South Africa. So what kind of conversations are you hoping that this panel will give us, in terms of getting us to this freedom, if you can call it that we need from a financial standpoint?
Sure. So, I Am South African was founded on the basis of looking at reimagining South Africa, but towards prosperity. There are racial issues in our country. There are various, there's corruption. There's so many things going on. But how we need to start refocusing the lens as South Africans ourselves, because this is also our country. So the people on the webinar today, on the chat, is bringing together a combination of government, civil society, and private sector. So as you were saying, it is led by Deputy Minister Pinky Kekana in the presidency, because she looks after or she is responsible for, from a ministry perspective in terms of monitoring and evaluation and looking at how we now start to, move forward. So that's the first, and it's led by her for delivering the keynote. We then have the ACEO, acting CEO of Brand South Africa, Mr. Tembile Ntombela. We are looking, South Africa is always a hotspot. It used to be a hotspot for investment in terms of the African continent and building our infrastructure and getting back what we have lost, especially in the post-unrest. So what happens when we have a country that is as unstable as we are right now? What happens from that perspective in terms of SA Inc.? We've got Dr. Stavros Nicolaou from Business for South Africa, who is going to give us, a scenario around and representing the private sector, looking at what are the main issues. How do we get to the point of economic recovery plan? How do we start hitting that? We can't obviously wait for herd immunity. It's taking too long. So how do we now get to that next point? The last person, but certainly not least, and I've just lost my...
Apologies for that.
Joking, is Mr. Selo Hatang from Nelson Mandela Foundation. Will talk us through how do we look at civil society's role. We look at civil society's role.
Yavi, let me allow you to drink water so that we can continue. But while Yavi is doing that, this is live television, and of course, such things do happen to us. But perhaps the details of the panel discussion can be found on government platforms, on Facebook, Twitter, as well as YouTube, using www.facebook.com/government.sa. And of course, the panel discussion does include the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Pinky Kekane, and Brand South Africa's Tembile Ntombela, as well as Dr. Nicolaou from Business of South Africa, for South Africa rather. And I believe that the Nelson Mandela Foundation will also be part of the discussion. Yavi, are you still with me? So Yavi, just as a point, just as a final point from me, and also maybe just to add everything and glue or the conversation together, connect us again to why it's so important as South Africans to understand that this conversation about economic freedom is essential and important and essentially pivotal to our legacy as South Africans, as Africans, particularly if you have to look at our heritage, because it is coming on, a day before we are to celebrate Heritage Day in this country.
Well, if you look at it, the next generation inherits what we leave. What this generation is leaving behind. So heritage is also, not only contextualized in terms of our culture and traditions, it's also about what we inherit and what are we leaving for the next generation to inherit. So heritage, and that is why we're using the term refocusing the lens, because we're not saying that it's about giving up or changing the dynamic in any way. We must continuously, obviously, value our culture and our heritage. That's what sets us apart. But it's also about including and ensuring that inclusion of thinking about, you know, economic aspects of life more in terms of effort, in terms of the time that we spend on it, and in terms of the things that we do around, you know, that next generation, and creating a South Africa that this generation can pass on to the next one. And right now, as a parent, and you as well, I would be, you know, I'm embarrassed in terms of saying that this is what we're handing over. There's so many things that we would need to fix. So this is where we need to start, what we need to start looking at, and it's the reality. It's the reality of the situation that we now face as a country.
All right, Yavi, thank you so much for your time. Yavi Madurai there from South Africa. She will be hosting this panel discussion which starts at 11 o'clock and ends at 12:30. Be sure to tune in to that engagement.